As somewhat of a Linux historian, it is beyond hilarious to me to watch history constantly repeat itself. Every single time some new tech or new software is being introduced, these same kind of arguments are brought up again and again and again, just slightly modified for the era. And recently, you may have seen some of what I'm gonna call the worst reporting I've seen in a long time regarding two issues in the utils project. This is the Rust rewrite of the GNU core utils. These issues being checksum implementation up to 17 times slower than GNU for some large files, and sort does not finish for large one-line file. Now, you might notice that this one here, the checksum issue, is marked as closed. Well, that being marked as closed is not new, and when this was initially being reported on, it was already resolved. When it was originally resolved, it wasn't a perfect resolution, going from 17 times slower to about 2.3 times slower, which is obviously still slower, but is a massive improvement. This also wasn't the end of it, and it's been further improved again, and the problem doesn't exist anymore. And in some contexts on certain files, it runs faster than the GNU version. As for the sort issue, this one is still marked as open. I found the sort utility does not finish to the stage of generating output for a large one-line file. This issue is not found in the GNU implementation. Now, very key point, large one-line file. This isn't normal operation of the sort command. This is a 4 GB text file containing a single line of the character A. Do you understand how many characters are in a 4 GB single line file of the character A? The answer is a lot. Now, it's a bug, and it absolutely should be fixed, but this is not normal operation of the sort command, and people got baited into thinking it was. So when one of the developers on uutils says, does it happen in real life? A lot of people who heard about this issue were angry about this. This is a completely legitimate comment. Is this an issue that affects sort in normal usage, or is it this weird edge case problem? Either way, it's an issue, but do we need to deal with it now, or can it be dealt with eventually? And the reporter here totally understands this distinction. I would think this usage of sort is very rare. I was comparing the performance of sort to the GNU implementation for a mean file, and noticed that while GNU finished within under 1 second, the uutils implementation simply would not finish. Yeah, but maybe test with actual use cases first. Sure thing, I'll look into that. I apologize for the provided scenario and its unrealistic nature. I performed a naive benchmark on some core utils using 2 irregular large files, and this was one of the things I noticed. Am I understanding correctly that the provided reproduction should mirror a use case that is more realistic? Oh, don't apologize. It is a valid bug. This is a totally normal question. The developer is concerned whether or not this is a weird edge case problem or something a regular user is going to run into. And if it's a weird edge case problem, it should be fixed. But it'll be done when it's done. And to frame this issue as anything besides this is dishonest at best and outright lying at worst. This is not some massive telling that the project is dead, the project is doomed. Oh my god, how could anybody use the Rust core utils when there's problems like this? That's not what this is. Someone with an amazing profile picture says, one could consider preventing someone from performing a denial of service attack on a system using uutils sort to parse incoming data a valid use case. Again, Sylvester never disagreed that this is a valid bug, but how valid in the real world is it? How likely is this going to be exploited? How likely is someone actually going to see this? And someone tries to provide the GNU solution to the problem, and Sylvester obviously says, hey, we can't look at that. This is an MIT project. That's a GPL project. We can't use code from a GPL project. This is how these licenses function. You just can't do that. I think the funniest part about all of this is Sylvester didn't even seem to be aware of where all of these people were coming from. He hadn't seen any of the reporting about this. He was just doing his job. There are two very important things with uutils. Firstly, the focus of the project initially is compatibility with the GNU core utils. The goal of uutils isn't to be open box. It is to be a one-to-one replacement for the GNU core utils. This means there is a lot of effort that needs to be spent dealing with these weird edge cases where things may not necessarily align correctly. Once that is done, then performance becomes the primary focus. Now, that doesn't mean initially there is going to be the dumbest implementations possible. Oh, it's 1,000 times slower, we don't care. It's just performance at the outset is not the focus of the project. And they are coming along quite well with compatibility. There's still a lot of work to do, but a lot of those basic things that were broken a couple of years ago, that's not a problem anymore. And we're at the point now where, for the most part, this is a reasonable replacement for a lot of use cases. Now, the reason all of this is being discussed is Ubuntu 25.10. 25.10 is going to be experimenting shipping uutils, shipping the Rust implementation of the GNU core utils. And I think a lot of people don't understand what a .10 release is. And it's been done so many times, and people still kind of misunderstand it. .10 releases are betas for the next LTS. That's what everything in Ubuntu's lifecycle is built around. It is built around the LTS releases. When Ubuntu wants to test something, for example, when they started shipping Wayland by default, this was done on a .10 release before immediately going back to X11 when, at the time, Wayland was nowhere near ready. This was long before even things like screen capture were working. It was not a good time back then. But the .10 release is the short lifecycle release that they can test things on, and if something doesn't work, yeah, it's going to annoy you for a .10 release, but you can always just go back to the LTS. And that might not be suitable for every single user, and I totally understand that, but that is the model that Ubuntu is built around and has been built around for a very long time now. Yes, you are going to uncover bugs like this one where things perform slower, or some things don't finish, or if we go to the issues, there are a number of things which don't behave entirely correctly, and as more people test them, more of these problems are going to be uncovered. And that is a big part of the reason it's being shipped on 25.10, so more of this testing can be done. It's not going to be there in 26.04. I can almost guarantee that now, because there are going to be problems, there are going to be things that break, and it's going to be a bit of a rough Ubuntu release. But a lot more issues are going to be identified, and then 2-3 years from now, when things are actually ready, then it will happen on an LTS release. And here is why I talk about history repeating itself. My more recent example being with Wayland. We began seeing the adoption of Wayland in popular distros sometime around 2014. Back then, it was not ready. It was very much not ready. It wasn't ready for the average user. It was barely ready for developers to dog food the system. This, at the time, was just an option. Then, as time progressed, we started seeing it become the default on Fedora Workstation, and then in 2021, Fedora KDE also made it the default as well, and various other distros have done so somewhere along the timeline. And at the time, in 2021, and still today, there are still legitimate issues that exist for users. But the issues that we have are getting less and less and less and less. And most of the issues you hear people talk about now are things like, I have an older NVIDIA card and it doesn't work nicely with Wayland. Things like that. There are other issues, absolutely. Things like copy-paste issues between Wayland and X-Wayland and other things like that. But that set of issues has been shrinking. However, there are still discussions on a lot of niche edge case issues, notably things like the window placement protocol, which is primarily used for a lot of weird engineering and science applications that use multiple windows to place the windows where they want to be placed. This is absolutely an issue, but is an issue that the majority of people are never going to use a piece of software that was ever going to use this protocol. Worse yet are the complete misrepresentations about Wayland, completely out-of-date documents that do nothing but fuel the fire. Notably this one, I've shown it many times. We have things like this Intel issue, which was dealt with a long time ago. The fact that XFCE doesn't work on Wayland, they're literally working on a port right now, and a bunch of the things in here are actually real problems. They are. But others, there are solutions in place. Or Wayland being biased towards Linux and breaks BSD. The BSDs are working on getting Wayland working. Or Wayland complicates server-side decorations. No, this is just GNOME does it. Or Wayland breaks window managers. Again, there are window managers that exist on Wayland. So much of this is just taking things entirely out of context to make things seem way worse than they actually are. Or my favorite, Wayland breaks screen recording applications. I'm literally using OBS right now. I'm not using a plugin or a workaround. I'm using the solution that is available in OBS. Or even worse than this, are the people that try to turn the adoption of this software into this weird culture war argument, which for some reason, and I don't understand why they do this, there are some Linux developers that feed into this as well, and they are just as bad and just as at fault for doing so. Now let's go back even further. Let's go back to the adoption of Pulseaudio. Because if you don't believe me that history repeats itself, that you see the same kinds of arguments over and over again, the same kinds of mistakes being done, Pulseaudio should prove that. Again, with the adoption of Pulseaudio, there were legitimate issues with the software, and maybe in some cases, it was being adopted too early. But a lot of the discourse around Pulseaudio being bad, all of these issues with Pulseaudio, again, there are issues, but a lot of the issues stem back to this early adoption and stem back to this early discourse around the state of Pulseaudio and the state of its adoption. From the Linux Plumbers Conference back in 2008, Linux audio, it's a mess. I'm not going to read the entire thing. I just want to focus on the parts from Lennart Pottering, at the time the lead developer of Pulseaudio. Pulseaudio first appeared to regular users in Fedora starting with version 8, and now, as Lennart puts it, is for up-to-date users the software that currently breaks your audio. This is the Pulseaudio guy who thinks that Pulseaudio at the time was not a good idea to adopt. Pulseaudio, however, can't give applications direct access to the hardware, and currently only about 70% of the Ulster applications use the API in a Pulseaudio safe way. 2008 was a very different time. Some high-profile applications are among those doing audio wrong. Flash and Skype are really broken applications, especially Flash, he said. Adobe split out the parts of its code that talk to the audio subsystem and certain other plumbing into an open source library, libflash support. But Flash remains broken. The proprietary Flash library talks to libflash support from multiple threads, and one thread calls a destructor while another continues to send data. It works until you close the browser window and you get a race. On his own blog, he talked about Ubuntu's adoption. Also talking about this other person that was constantly making articles just trashing on Pulseaudio, but again, I just want to talk about the part about Ubuntu. Some distributions did a better job adopting Pulseaudio than others. On the good side, I certainly have to list Mandriva, Debian, and Fedora. On the other hand, Ubuntu didn't exactly do a stellar job. They didn't do their homework. Adopting Pulseaudio in a distribution is a fair amount of work, given that it interfaces with so many different things at so many different places. The integration with other subsystems is crucial. The information was all out there, communicated on the wiki, the mailing list, and the Pulseaudio IRC channel. But if you join and hang around on neither, then you won't get the memo. To my surprise, when Ubuntu adopted Pulseaudio, they moved it into one of their LTS releases right away. This is why they don't do this anymore. This is why when they want to test the change, it goes in a .10 release. which I guess can be called gutsy. On the background that I work for Red Hat and Pulseaudio is not part of RHEL at this time, I get a lot of flack from Ubuntu users, and I'm pretty sure the vast amount of it is undeserving and not my fault. And in a later piece saying, Ubuntu doesn't get it. So in the past, Ubuntu packaged Pulseaudio in a way that, let's say, was not exactly optimal. I thought they'd gotten around to fixing things since then. Turns out they didn't. Seems in their upcoming release they again did some genius thing to make Pulseaudio on Ubuntu perform worse than it could. The Ubuntu kernel contains all kind of closed source and other crap to no limit, but backporting a tiny patch that is blessed and merged upstream and in Fedora for ages, that won't do. Gah. And it doesn't stop there. This patch is an outright insult. This is disappointing. Madness. Not good. Ubuntu, really not good. And I'll get all the complaints for this effed up again. Thanks. Ubuntu, you really can do better than this. Again, the adoption of Pulseaudio was not without its issues. There were a lot of breaking changes. There were a lot of things that legitimately were issues. But a lot of the problems that people were seeing were not actually from Pulseaudio, they were from somewhere else in the stack making a mistake, and a lot of those sort of sentiments around Pulseaudio have stuck around basically this entire time. Another great example is KDE. A lot of people think KDE is really buggy. And of course, there are bugs in KDE, there are bugs in any bit of software, but a lot of that mentality isn't actually based on KDE in its current state. It's actually from the release of KDE 4, which was a development version that got tagged as a release version. I don't know what they were thinking back then, but somebody went and did so. And that version, at least initially, was reviewed into the ground. Everybody hated it. Towards the end of KDE 4, it was a good release, but launch was garbage. So what do all of these projects have in common? And we even talk about the adoption of Systemd. There are, and there were, real legitimate issues that exist within the projects. And maybe the wide deployment of the project was a little bit too soon and was badly handled. But once those initial issues got resolved and things were actually in a good state, the discourse around the project quickly diverted into niche and minor issues, and in some cases, issues that don't actually exist because they never existed, or they were already dealt with by the time that anybody found out it was actually an issue. And people very quickly lose track of what is actually going on, what are the actual problems with the project, and it becomes more of this, like, political, culture war-y sort of way of arguing about a project, like, oh, these people like the project, therefore the project is bad, or these people are working on the project, therefore this project is bad. And this goes any direction on the political spectrum. Whether it be utils or anything else, if you want to dislike something, hey, you're allowed to dislike it. That's totally fine. But if you're going to dislike something, you should be the most well-informed on that topic. You should understand the actual state of the project and the actual problems that do exist. And if there are solutions you're not a fan of, understand why you're not a fan of those solutions, what could be done better, how would you like to see things actually resolved. Now, you don't have to do this, but if you're not going to do this, I'm just going to disregard every single thing you say, because if you can't reason about a thing you dislike, you just irrationally hate it. And I'm sorry, but I can't have a conversation with somebody who just irrationally hates something. But what do you think? Especially for you guys who've been around for a long time. If you've been around, since, I don't know, Ubuntu 8.04, for example, what have you noticed over time? And have you noticed that a lot of the arguments you saw before that got hashed out have just been repeated again and again, or maybe brought up in a different context with some new software that comes along? I'd love to know. So if you like the video, go like the video, go subscribe as well, and if you really like the video and you want to become one of these amazing people over here, check out the Patreon subscribe star Libera Pay linked in the description down below. That's going to be it for me, and I forgot what this video topic was. I already blanked.
Something like this.